I'm not a rag doll. I'm not an animal. I had a nightmare. I was trapped in an elevator with R. Kelly and I screamed for you. Text messages in the Sean Combs case have been quite impactful so far. Those that help the prosecution's case and those that may really hurt it. We're going to dive into some of the major text messages that were shown to the jury so far in this criminal trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. In any criminal trial, attorneys will tell you that some of the most important, most impactful, potentially the most incriminating evidence are text messages, right? Jurors see them, they read them with their own eyes. Sure, context matters, who sent them, when they were sent, that's all important, but they are very, very, very telling about what someone may have been thinking or doing at that point in time. And in the Sean Diddy Combs racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution trial, text messages play such an important role. The jury has already seen a lot of text messages so far. So we thought, why not go back, analyze some of the key messages in this case so far. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that comes out, because you have to imagine that the jurors are going to dissect these text messages when they go to deliberate in several weeks. And remember, these are the central questions. Did Combs engage in a pattern of inducing women into sex acts with men using force, fraud, or coercion, sex trafficking, or was this consensual and they were all willing participants? Did Combs use violence and threats and intimidation as the leader of a criminal enterprise in a pattern of abuse and sexual exploitation of women and violence against women and committing all these crimes? Or was this just a powerful guy who had a lot of resources and he was engaged in toxic, violent relationships, but it was more domestic violence and not a federal crime? Or did any of these events not actually happen? So these are the questions the jurors are going to have to wrestle with. Let's go to the texts. For that, let me bring in criminal defense attorney Mauricio Padilla, friend of the show. Mauricio, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. First of all, generally speaking, are you ever surprised at trials how much people put in writing and how much it comes back to potentially bite them? I mean, the text messages, I think sometimes are on par with surveillance footage. That's how impactful they are.
Yeah, and it's even worse because as opposed to surveillance footage, text messages are sent by the actual defendant. So it's like, you sent this. This is something that isn't alleged that you said. No, it came from your phone because on this particular day, at this particular time, you sent it. Every single big case that I handle, murders, narcotics trafficking, nowadays, all of them, I have to involve a forensic data expert because every single one of them includes cell phone text messages, cell phone location services, videos. For some reason, people, even seasoned criminals, continue to put their thoughts in text messages, whether it's WhatsApp. People think that WhatsApp is safer, but if you don't clear out your WhatsApp, it's just as incriminating as any other text message if you don't have them, automatically deleting. So yeah, it's something that I constantly have to deal with in every case.
And sometimes it's interesting arguments, right? You'll have somebody say, well, how do you know the defendant was actually using that phone, right? Can you prove it? Maybe somebody else was using his phone. Somebody else was making those Google searches, right? Different kind of case. Or this is interesting. Sometimes you'll have, particularly in a murder case, where there's the allegation that the killer was actually using the victim's phone to message people, right? To flip up the timeline a little bit. We don't have that here. What I will tell you what we have here is we have alleged victims and their messages, and we have Diddy's messages. And there doesn't seem to be a dispute about who sent what. It's just what does it mean and putting into context. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. So let's get into this. I want to start with the text messages from Jane. Okay, this is alleged victim number 2 in the indictment. She's using a pseudonym. She's currently still testifying right now as we record this. And she claims that she was in a relationship with Sean Combs from 2021 to 2024, but that she had sex with male sex workers in front of Combs for his sexual desires, his benefit, and that she was essentially pressured into doing this even when she was sick or when she was exhausted, that they would last for hours upon hours. And also, she talked about other things, that she was tasked with transporting drugs across state lines for Sean Combs, so an important witness. And the prosecution, to me at least, it seems they were keen to show text messages from her to Combs to potentially show she didn't want to do this, that this was not consensual. For instance, here are some messages that she apparently sent Combs. I don't want to be used and locked in a room to perform and fulfill your fantasies. I'm coming to the realization of what this really is. My heart is really in this and it's breaking. I don't want to play this role in your life anymore. There's also, our experiences are desensitizing sex for me. There's also, I'm not a porn star. I'm not an animal. I need a break. I don't want to do anything. I've hit a wall. Oh, and this is a very long one. I wish we could jog this back to when we first started dating and just getting to know each other. Ever since I opened Pandora's box, I've never been able to close it. One night of fun turned into the entirety of our relationship, and now it's all I'm expected to do and get called for. It's hurting me because I'm so much more than being loved in the dark in hotel rooms, doing things that make me feel disgusted with myself. I'm confusing your lust for me as real love. My heart is breaking in this, and it's breaking. I don't want you to play this role. It's dark, sleazy, makes me feel disgusted with myself. I feel it's the only reason you have me around and why you pay for the house. I don't want to feel obligated to perform these nights with you in fear of losing the roof over my head. I don't want to keep feeling like that anymore. I'm crying as I type this. We just need to talk like adults and figure out where we'll go from here. And by the way, with respect to that longer message, it seems that Combs apparently responded, "Girl, stop." Mauricio, does this show the necessary, proper lack of consent that is needed for sex trafficking?
No, in my opinion, it doesn't, but it doesn't help Diddy's case at all. I think it is damning in the sense that it shows the power that he had over her, the fact that at some point she was at least articulating to him that she was not, that she didn't want to continue with it. It isn't what we saw with Cassie in the video where he's physically beating her up. She's not saying that he physically forced her. She's letting him know that she doesn't want to do this, but I don't think it rises to the level. However, it's not something that that's helping Diddy at all. At the end of the day, the prosecution is checking off a lot of boxes with Jane, and even if it doesn't check off the force, fraud, or coercion, it's still part of the MO, part of the pattern. And I think in closing, they're going to articulate that to the jury. Like, listen, yeah, did he get to the level that he got with Cassie, with Jane? No, but it shows the type of person he is. The problem with Jane is that Jane, at some point, she makes comments. I heard she had a back and forth where they asked her, how much is a Bottega bag? And she was, how much does my body cost? Well, the obvious follow-up for that is, you told me, you're the one that put it on sale. At the end of the day, Jane is somebody that, because she wanted to live in a $10,000 house, was doing things that she didn't want to do. And she can send a text message months later or half a year later and complain about the situation she's in, but she's the one that's having unprotected sex with male escorts.
In other words, you think that this looks more like, and I don't know a better way to say this, but a girlfriend who's upset, right? I mean, if there was somebody who was having a relationship with somebody, and let's just say, and this is radically different, but I'm just saying, you imagine the jury could interpret it as the same kind of messages that a man or woman would receive if they weren't exclusive with their partner or weren't being treated right by their partner, and they felt that they were just being used for sex. You're saying that that's what the messages look like. The other counter argument is the prosecution has been trying to say he was holding financial control over her. He was demanding things from her. There's a power imbalance. He was controlling her appearance. And, there's also a level of violence, too, that they talk about. And she couldn't really step away. And at least it puts Combs on notice that she didn't want to do it, but he kept allegedly pressuring her to do that. It might not be throwing her into a room and saying, do this, but that level of coercion or that level of fraud and using deception, you don't think that it rises to the level. This still looks like more of a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship?
It's a gray area. I'll tell you this: if Diddy was my client, I don't like the response of "girl, stop." That's pretty like you're not even letting her know that you paying her rent is not tied with these acts that she's complaining about. So in that sense, yeah, I see that there is that type of pressure, and his response wasn't adequate enough to do away with any ideas that she had that he was capable of not paying her rent.
Let me throw this one to you. I thought this one might be a compelling one. So after Cassandra Ventura filed her initial sexual assault lawsuit against Sean Combs in November of 2023, and Jane was apparently romantically involved with Combs at the time, she messaged him and she wrote, "I feel like I'm reading my own sexual trauma. It makes me sick how 3 solid pages, word for word, is exactly my experiences and my anguish." Doesn't that support an argument for the prosecution that a victim may not even be aware of their own victimization until they read something like this?
Yes, and I think that sometimes that is true. However, then the other argument is, well, even after you read that and you wrote that to him, how many more hotel nights were you involved in? She was with him to the very end. And I think she gave testimony that despite her resentment, that she still loves him. So I understand that what you're saying, but then the argument is, why did you continue to do it? If I was his defense attorney, I would tell this jury and the women of this jury, this woman is the one that allowed male escorts to penetrate her body without a condom. And at some point, as a woman, that's your body. And you could tell this billionaire boyfriend of yours, no, I'm not going to do it. The more that I hear about this case, the more shocked I am at how much billionaires can get away with.
You make a very fair argument regarding Jane's testimony. I've talked about it before on prior sidebars, that this is not a clean case, particularly her testimony, because the more she talks about love and her partner and cuddling and trying to set up these events and saying she was just doing it to play a role or just to do it to make him happy. And I believe there was at least one communication where she might have said that she consented, that I know I'm consenting. It's problematic, the fact that she was in a relationship with him just weeks before he was ultimately arrested. But there are certain dynamics that have to come into play. Dr. Dawn Hughes testified about dynamics between a victim and abuser and why they might stay in touch and why they might not leave. But I will tell you, his text messages, let's talk about his text messages with Jane, because you mentioned it before. There was this. Let me ask you what you make of this. So when she apparently wrote things like, "It's been 3 years of me having to bleep strangers, I'm tired," he apparently texts, "So we're breaking up." Now she texts in part, "I don't throw sex in your face constantly, but the type of nights we have are nights that require everything out of me for 30 to 40 hours straight. I figured on my birthday you would switch it up for me." And he responds, "Let's be friends because I can't take this part. For real, I'm done with you comparing yourself to someone else. I treat you good, and if you don't feel so, let's just be friends because I'm tired of these long texts telling me what I'm doing wrong." And he also texted her once, "Look at the roof over your head and that pretty smile," so seemingly in reference to paying for her rent and her teeth. Mauricio, is this evidence of manipulation? Is this evidence of deceit? Is this evidence of coercion or a toxic boyfriend?
It is evidence of him controlling her financially. If I was his attorney, I would not like that evidence at all, and I think it's going to hurt him. Listen, Jane's testimony is problematic, but I think it's credible, and I think most people are believing what she says. And the fact that she doesn't get to that level that the prosecution may need for the purposes of fraud, coercion, or force, it gives her even more credibility on the other things that she's clearly checking off. Trafficking drugs across state lines, the fact that the male escorts, were brought from other states or in other states. So she's helping the prosecution immensely. And at the end of the day, even if it's problematic to satisfy one element, if she's credible, the prosecution's doing good.
You made a great point. Yeah, she could definitely be helping to prove maybe an ironclad case of transportation to engage in prostitution. She might be helping with the underlying drug offenses of racketeering. I agree with you. From what I take, this is not an example of her testimony. She's not being honest. This is my personal take. She seems credible to me. Everything I could take is true. I think what the defense is going to say is, you're a victim of the prosecution, right? We're taking your testimony and we're transforming it into a racketeering case. We're taking your testimony and transforming it into sex trafficking. And I think the defense is going to go on the offensive, not necessarily against Jane, but they're going to go on the offensive against the prosecution. And I don't see them fighting these hotel nights. They're not saying they didn't happen, but they're saying that they're not a crime. They're not a federal crime. So I think this is not about her credibility. It's more about it doesn't fit into the prosecution's narrative. Now, he wrote other things to her like, F you, I'm blocking you, leave me alone, con artist. This is also after she allegedly requested money to end the relationship. But Mauricio, the idea of texts evidencing manipulation, and manipulation could be an element of coercion for sex trafficking, I thought this was interesting. So we go back to 2016, when Combs, as we know, was seen on tape appearing to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine at the LA Intercontinental Hotel. He apparently messages Cassie shortly after, call me, the cops are here, I've got 6 kids, yo, please call, I'm surrounded, you're gonna abandon me all alone. The cops weren't there, right? It came up through testimony that he bought the security footage, allegedly bought the security footage. It's being used to show bribery as an underlying racketeering crime. Doesn't that feel like a sense of his alleged manipulation? And if the jury says, oh, this is just another example of how he was victimizing Cassie and using different methods to get what he wanted, right?
Yeah, and he's involving his children, and it's just continuously chipping away at the character of the defendant that eventually the jury's going to have to make a decision on. So yeah, it does show that he's the type of person that's capable of manipulating. When you said that the defense has to attack the prosecution, I agree with you, because it's very difficult to attack these women.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're victims at some level. Whether you're a victim like Cassie, flat out like getting beat up, or you're a victim like Jane because she was obviously not happy and she did a lot of things that she regretted. As a defense attorney, there's only so much that you could do to them on the stand where the jury's not gonna now hate you for cross-examining them and for doing your job. So I agree with you. They're gonna have to shift it towards the prosecution. I saw Dave Chappelle on Instagram where he talks about how Diddy's in trouble, and he says this guy's in a RICO case by himself. And I think it's that it's super funny when Dave Chappelle says it, but I'm envisioning that the defense is going to highlight that in their closing, where you never see that. I've been doing this 23 years, and I've never seen anybody in a RICO case by themselves. That's how much the prosecution wants them.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, and the prosecution will say, look, we heard from the assistants, right? You heard testimony about the assistants. You heard testimony about security guards. You heard testimony about Kaye, his former chief of staff, how they were all setting up the rooms and getting drugs and trying to hide up violence and protect him at all costs. We don't need to charge other people. He's the ringleader, maybe something like that. But look, I agree with you. I think that they won't beat her up because she's not a crusader. She's not a crusader who's going after Sean Combs. She's just testifying. She was issued a subpoena to testify, and she's providing testimony. It's not her job to figure out how it fits into the case. She's just providing her narrative. Now, I do want to stick with Cassie for a minute because, again, for sex trafficking, the prosecution has to say this wasn't consensual. So going to the idea of whether or not it was properly communicated to Sean Combs that she didn't want to consent to freak-offs with sex workers, let me go to this exchange. So Cassie wrote him, I want to talk to you about something tomorrow. Going to sleep, love you. He writes back, is it going to stress me out? What is it about? And Ventura responded, freak-offs. It can wait. It's not a big deal. And then he responds, now you don't want to do it anymore. Oh, I already know. You so predictable. And Cassie writes back, really? Okay. Since that's definitely what it was, we'll leave it at that then. Since I'm so predictable, have a good night. That a bombshell here, Mauricio?
I mean, it shows that he knew where her mind was at, in my opinion. I mean, it clearly, it's not like if he thought that she was, that she was still voluntarily part of it. He's in advance of her telling him, he's telling her that what he thinks, and it shows that he had knowledge and that he's, subjectively believed that she didn't want to be part of these freak-offs. So yeah, it is a little bit of a bombshell. And listen, it's consistent with the rest of the testimony, all the other testimony. I do know that Jane testified, and I wanted to mention this. I think Jane testified that she didn't think that KK or the other employees would ever come into the room So there was some testimony from Jane that may have stepped on the toes of the prosecution's argument that these employees were integral part of the freak-offs. I think Jane testified that there was a little bit of distance. That could easily be explained by the prosecution by saying, listen, his employees knew he was freaky, but Diddy wanted to put up a layer of how freaky he was, and maybe he didn't want the employees knowing about the male escorts and all that other stuff.
Well, it's a problem because for racketeering conspiracy, they need to all be in agreement. They need to have a common purpose. They all have to be on the same page. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be with freak-offs, but if it's to protect him and to engage in forced labor or kidnapping or arson or bribery, I mean, that might be enough. They don't need the sex trafficking to convict him of racketeering. It would definitely help the charge, but yeah, you make a great point. Now, going back to Cassie and going back to text messages, it's not like the jury needed more evidence of physical abuse of Cassie after the 2016 video or corroborating testimony from others who apparently witnessed it or observed it and apparent photos of injuries. But I want to show you these apparent texts from Cassie to Combs. One says, I have a black eye and a fat lip. You are sick to think it's okay what you've done. Please stay far away from me. There's another, when you get bleeped up the wrong way, you always want to show me that you have the power and you knock me around. I'm not a rag doll. I'm someone's child. There was another message where she apparently sent him a photo of an injury after Combs allegedly threw her into a bed frame. And she sends him the photo with the message, so you can remember. And Combs, by the way, apparently responded, you don't know when to stop. You have pushed it too far. Ventura told him to just say sorry. What do you think the impact of those messages are going to be for the jury?
That's huge. That's like, for sure, prosecution PowerPoint at closing with the messages really big. It's clear. He doesn't deny it. It shows the violence. It shows that she's memorializing in text. It's really bad, it's damning, and it will be part of the closing for sure. And that's something that's gonna stick with the jury. Her words and her telling him of how she felt and the things that he did, and even showing her and even showing him the damage that he inflicted on her. So that's extremely telling, and that's gonna be part of the closing for sure.
Mauricio, let's be fair here. There have been messages that have certainly helped Sean Combs too, or at least given his defense a lot of room to make an argument. There was a message from Cassie to Combs that said, I'm always ready to freak off, LOLOL. And then Combs had written at one point, he basically said, I'm so in the mood, I can't concentrate. And Ventura responds, I'll go to Dwayne Reed for candles and then set up the room, meaning allegedly setting up the room for a freak off. Cassie wrote at another time, baby, I want to FO so bad, but I don't want to bleep myself up. What am I to do? And this was apparently, she testified, meaning she had a movie premiere, and she said she was basically trying to tell him she didn't want to exhaust herself doing this before such a big event, but to not do it in a way that would make him angry. Mauricio, I wonder if the jurors are going to wrestle with these messages. Is this her being a willing participant, or is this her subtly saying at times she doesn't want to do it, or just saying whatever she needs to do to appease him because she's worried? And I think the prosecution will say this. What happens if she says no? Look at the 2016 tape if she says no. So I wonder, are these messages, how helpful they are to the defense now that I'm thinking about them.
Yeah, well, listen, the defense is going to use it because they have to use whatever they can. They will try to use it. At the end of the day, consent is something that is temporary. You give consent until you don't give consent. So that's something that I'm sure the prosecution is going to get into. Yeah, was she a willing participant at some points? Yes. Was Jane a willing participant at some point? Yes. Is there now plenty of evidence that at least that both of them at some point articulated to Diddy with specificity that they did not want to be part of it? Yes. And I think that that's something that's going to be highlighted in their closing argument. And listen, everybody knows that consent is only good for the time being. The moment that a woman says no, that's it. That's it.
That's it. She could have said yes 9 times out of 10. The 10th time she says no, it's not consensual. Yep. Now, you want to talk about a text message that I think really helped the defense? Let's talk about Brianna Bongolan. So she testified that Combs dangled her off a 17-story balcony. Important evidence, right, of a pattern of abuse of women for racketeering, particularly important if Cassie was indeed aware of this. And there's evidence to suggest that she was, because if Cassie was around this physically violent environment, it goes to the coercion aspect of sex trafficking. Look what she was around. Could she really say no to Sean Combs? But anyway, Brianna claims that this happened, but then she apparently wanted to buy Sean Combs a sweatshirt right after all this. Listen to this text from Brianna to Cassie. oh, I'm gonna go grab you newborn and raise soon. P wants some? And then she's asked by the defense attorney at trial, ma'am, isn't P Mr. Combs? Yes. You're asking Cassie if P, for Puffy, right? Yes. You're asking if he would like a sweatshirt? Yes, I did. Okay, and you're alleging that Mr. Combs just 2 weeks prior to this hung you over a balcony, threw you into furniture, you sustained severe injuries, and now you're asking if he'd like a t-shirt? Yeah, like I said, we had that FaceTime call. We were trying to be cool. Mauricio, that message on top of metadata of photos that would seem maybe suggest that the photos of the injuries were taken before the attack, travel records that indicate maybe that Combs wasn't in LA but was actually on the East Coast. That message stuck out to me. Did it stick out to you?
Yeah, it does. Listen, the metadata and the travel, I think, is more damning than the actual text message. At the end of the day, I understand that many people that are hearing about the trial and maybe the jurors could question the dynamics, but we're looking at something of like a type of lifestyle that we don't even know anything about. This is a billionaire guy that has people under his control, and I've seen in my own career where women that are victimized immediately act a different way. That's not right. That's not something that is new to violence, domestic violence. You can get abused one day, and the next day you're sending text messages like if nothing ever happened. Because if you are in fear of this person, and I don't know if what she says happened, but if you are in fear of somebody that dangled you off a building and they successfully put you back in your place, you don't want to alert them, you don't want to scare them, you just want to act right. So that's one way that the text messages could be explained. She's just trying to act right.
That's a very, very fair interpretation. And the problem for the prosecution, though, and this came out this week, there was an argument, they tried to recall the testimony of Dr. Dawn Hughes. They wanted to bring her back to the stand, arguably to try to explain some of the behavior of people other than Cassie. The problem is the judge is not going to allow it. And the judge said she testified basically about romantic relationships and the power dynamics and the trauma between romantic relationships and victims and abusers. You should have asked more questions about employees or friends that were alleged victims of Sean Combs and that dynamic, or not necessarily about Sean Combs, but just friends or employees and abuse in general. So that might have been a missed opportunity, although the jury might just take Dr. Dawn Hughes' testimony and always have it in their minds as they're thinking about it. But speaking about Bongolan, so you remember that the prosecution has been portraying Combs as somebody who was engaged in drug trafficking, right? It's a predicate crime for racketeering. And in a more sinister fashion from the indictment, they say that he used drugs to keep his victims, like Cassie, compliant for sex trafficking purposes. But then there's this text to Brianna, and this says, when friends get high with each other, they're not supposed to let their friends bleep up and not try to stop them. You're real whack to me for that. If you want to do K with her, so seeming like ketamine with Cassie, if you want to do K with her, at least have her back. Mauricio, is this very helpful for the defense to say, you're saying he's a drug trafficker, you're saying that he was using drugs to keep Cassie compliant, and yet he's concerned with the drugs she's using?
I think they're going to have to look at the text messages in the totality. Like, is he really mad that she was doing K, or was he mad because she was doing K without him? Was he mad because he felt that she was now having a closer relationship with her and that maybe information was going to be passed that he didn't want? I think you got to look at the text in the totality of the circumstances. Regarding that he provided drugs for people in orgies. I mean, listen, I'm just going to go on and say that any multiple day orgy out there has to be fueled by drugs. I don't think a human being could actually be involved in that type of behavior without drugs. So I think that if the defense is going to be like, oh yeah, all of a sudden everybody in this orgy is a victim, and Diddy is the bad guy for giving them drugs when they're voluntarily here consuming drugs and having sex. And regarding the trafficking issue, if you are having these freak-offs, you're just trafficking in drugs just to keep these people high. I mean, an ounce of coke is 28 grams? I mean, how many ounces would they go through in one of these freak-offs? So I think they're going to have plenty of evidence of Diddy having to buy, voluminous amounts of drugs just to keep these freak-offs going.
Okay, talking about other potentially helpful texts to the defense, we remember Mia, Combs' former personal assistant, who testified that Sean Combs sexually assaulted her, gave her PTSD. Well, after that apparent assault, she writes him, just thinking of you today and every day. Last night I had a nightmare. I was trapped in an elevator with R. Kelly and I screamed for you and you came to rescue me. Thank you for that too. Sending you love. There was another message where she writes him, apparently, just sending you all the love in the world. Now, she claimed that she was still under the psychological grip of Sean Combs, that she couldn't explain it psychologically, that he used to be her protector. And this is also coupled with, other social media posts where she's glowing and praising him. Mauricio, but you made a good point before, right? In one sense, you could say, oh, she's making all this up, right? This is clear evidence she's making this up. This is what the defense is going to say. She perjured herself on the stand. Or if someone really is in fear and someone really is a victim, is this so abnormal to see this? How do you think the jury is going to reconcile these texts?
I mean, listen, it isn't abnormal at all. I mean, for women that are abused in abusive relationships with anybody, whether it be their lover, their boyfriend, their husband, their boss, for them to send text messages regarding love doesn't really have anything to do with factually whether or not they were abused or not. But listen, in the end of it, I don't think that every single person involved in this case is a victim, black and white. I think a lot of people after this blew up were like, oh, you know what? Now I have PTSD. Now I'm suing. Now I'm doing this. Maybe that's the situation here. But it's easy to explain away text messages that are consistent with what Diddy wanted to hear. Because if you're fearful of financial pressure, physical violence, or whatever it is that you're fearful, you're going to act right. You're going to text him what he wants to hear because you don't want to rock the boat. You want everything to stay status quo. You want your bills paid. You want your drugs. You want whatever it is that he's providing. But it's still hurtful for him. It's still hurtful for him.
Well, talking about a text that might be problematic for Sean Combs, sticking with Mia for a second. So after Cassie's lawsuit, after it came out, the allegation seemed to be that Combs and his ex-bodyguard D-Rock suspiciously tried to reach out to Mia. So we go to November 30th, 2023, 5 years after she had left working for Sean Combs, 14 days after Ventura had filed her lawsuit. And Mia testifies that D-Rock was calling her and saying how Cassie and Combs would, quote, just fight like a normal couple. The argument would be that he was trying to get Mia on the same page to say, there was nothing criminal or nefarious going on between the couple, right? Now, Mia testified that her radar went off. And she claims he also said, your boy Puff, he misses you. We were just reminiscing about old family. And she claims that Combs tried to call her, but she ignored the calls. But then, and this is big, she alleges that D-Rock texted her over the next several months urging her to call Combs. And then he allegedly wrote, let me know how I can send you something. And she apparently responds, no, I never asked for anything. D-Rock apparently responds, I know you didn't ask me for anything. I'm allowed to send my sister a gift. Now, she interpreted that as Combs making sure through D-Rock that she wasn't a threat, that maybe she could be paid off. It's especially important considering Combs was accused of trying to contact witnesses while locked up in the MDC. He's also accused of bribing a security guard at the Intercontinental Hotel, paying him $100,000 for the surveillance footage of him appearing to beat up Cassie. But then Combs apparently texts Mia, just need my memory jogged on some things. You were my right hand for years, so I just need to speak to you to remember who was even around me, and it would be good to hear your voice. But if you don't want to, all good, just let me know. Love. And then he signed off with emojis, a heart, and a praying hands. Mauricio, those messages are quite telling.
Yeah, listen, Diddy's an idiot. Let's just face it. He's not the smartest guy. He catapulted to fame on the shoulders of Biggie Smalls, and he was able to accomplish everything that he did. But it's funny that when I look at somebody like him trying to act like a villain in a Marvel character and then consistently committing egregious errors that are going to blow up in your face, it's obvious that he was trying to conduct witness tampering. He was trying to reach out to see if he could control her. But that's the way that a narcissist is. There's no way that someone like Diddy was going to get sued by somebody and not attempt to go out there and try to figure out what witnesses are going to say, try and manipulate what witnesses are going to say. It's just part of his demeanor, his character. And you're right, he's been accused of doing it even after being locked up in a federal detention. He's still trying to do it. So I think it's consistent with him and guys like him.
And look, it will go to the overall racketeering charge or the underlying crimes of, obstruction or bribery. That, I think that's what if they're trying to sell the idea of him being a mafia boss. But look, the other way of looking at it is, and I'm sure the defense will say, he was doing damage control in the same way he was trying to buy up tapes to make sure that they weren't released, or he was nervous about things getting out, or, he was falsely accused. He wanted to make sure no one else would come out against him falsely. He was doing damage control, as any celebrity would do in these kinds of positions. So I'm sure that's the way they'll come about it. But Mauricio Padilla, thank you so much for coming on. You were terrific. I love having you on. Thanks so much, Mauricio.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, sir.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.